Okay, welcome to the third video from Class 4 on testimonial injustice. And this is the video where we will be talking about testimonial injustice itself. This video will actually be shorter because of all the groundwork we've laid talking about power. I think that makes the concept, the target concept that we're looking at, testimonial injustice, more clear. It was already a fairly clear concept. I mean, we intuitively understand what it means to be not believed because of who you are, but understanding the background power dynamics makes it easier for us to go into more detail about it. So now that we have that background information, I'm going to cut over to an old video for some review. So, to review, social power is the practically socially situated capacity to control others' actions, right? In practical situations, you can get people to do what you want. And this power may be exercised actively or passively, and it may be exercised by particular agents, or it may operate purely structurally. Within this context, we also talked about identity power, which is social power based on shared imaginative conceptions of the social identity of the person exercising power and the person subject to it. That is, identity power is power based on stereotypes about people in different positions. And you don't have to believe in the stereotypes. You don't have to believe that the stereotypes are distorting. But if you recognize that they exist in society, that's going to impact your behavior, and that's going to lead to social power. So in this case, social power is not just based on social coordination, but on shared ideas about social roles. So when I talked about social coordination before, that's when I was using the example of grading, how me giving a grade actually depends on other people coordinating with me. So I'm not just typing letters into a computer, I'm actually changing social reality because the records office acknowledges it and employers acknowledge it and that sort of thing. So ordinary social power depends on social coordination. Identity power depends on not just social coordination, but shared ideas about social roles. So that's a summary of the previous video. Now I want to talk about epistemology. I've used this word before in class. I'll use it again. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, what it is and how to get it. And the idea here is that amongst all the kinds of injustice there is in the world, all the different ways that we can be unfair, we can be inconsistent, there's also a specific kind of unfairness called epistemic injustice. And this is the injustice that occurs when one is wronged in one's capacity as a knower. The slide there should say wronged with ED on it. That is, there's a certain way you feel insulted when people don't take your word seriously. You've got normally one of the basic human functions is to communicate information to each other. And so if you say it's raining outside, the other person knows to bring an umbrella, right? That's just a basic social role. You are someone who knows things and can communicate that to other people. When your testimony is doubted, even though it is correct, and it is doubted for unfair reasons or irrelevant reasons, you feel wronged. And part of what's happened is that your capacity as a knower, your social role as someone who knows things and can pass on information has been insulted. So testimonial injustice is a specific example of epistemic injustice. You have a general category, epistemic injustice, whenever you're insulted in your role as a knower. And then testimonial injustice is specifically about when you're insulted by having someone not believe you. So that was the main example I was giving in the last slide. But there are other ways to insult people as knower, but this is really the main one. So testimonial injustice is a kind of epistemic injustice where one is wronged because one's assertions were not given the right amount of credibility for unfair reasons. So here we're talking about the right amount of credibility. And it's interesting here to note then that you can actually be doubted unfairly. You can also be believed unfairly. So just as some people's testimony is unfairly dismissed, other people will instantly believe them because of who they are. And that's also a kind of injustice. The idea is that prejudice will surreptitiously inflate or deflate the credibility afforded the speaker. So just because of a person's identity, they get treated more seriously or not. And sometimes this will be sufficient to cross the threshold for belief or acceptance. Sometimes this little boost or this little push down is enough to change whether or not you believe someone. So that the hearer's prejudice causes them to miss out on a piece of knowledge. This is why this is epistemic. Ultimately, it's interesting, the prejudiced person is one of the people losing out here because they don't get information that they need. All right, so testimonial injustice comes when you are wronged because your assertions aren't believed. And paradigmatically, this could be a credibility deficit, but it can also be a credibility excess. So it's important to note that whether something is an excess or credibility, you have too much or too little credibility, doesn't map directly onto whether it's good or bad. So most of the time, credibility deficits are bad, and credibility excesses are good for the person who has that access, but not always. Fricker gives many examples, but I feel like the most straightforward one is the fact that if someone has a credibility excess and no one is doubting them, they lose out on important information. If you are consistently being puffed up and told you're the smartest person in the room when you're not, you don't listen to people, you don't get good information. She has more concrete examples, like, for instance, a professor is working with a graduate student on a paper, and the graduate student admires the professor so much that they don't provide needed input, right? I don't know. I mean, images of powerful people surrounded by yes men are pretty common, and we can understand why actually being surrounded by yes men is bad for you. You might, for instance, think that you could invade Ukraine and conquer it in 2 days, and it turns out that that's not true, but everyone believed you when you said it because you had a credibility excess. That's not going to happen to us, but it has happened recently. It's also interesting that there are times when a credibility deficit can be to your advantage. And Fricker's example here is everyone's favorite TV detective, Detective Columbo, who is constantly underestimated by his opponents because they think he's an idiot, but he's not. But the other thing that Fricker emphasizes is that these cases where people manage to use it to their advantage, that they are underestimated, those are rarities. And actually, most of the time, credibility deficits are bad for you. If people aren't believing you because of who you are, rather than the truth of what you're saying, you have been wronged. And furthermore, she says that the most important examples of testimonial injustice involve large-scale identity prejudices. So this gets back to a thing that I was talking about in the first video. She contrasts examples of people being doubted because they are women or because they are people of color, with cases where people are doubted because, for instance, of their academic specialization. One example she gives is she thinks someone isn't an expert in a field, but actually he is an expert in the field. And her point is that these other examples of testimonial injustice are less of a big deal because they're not about power relationships that carry on throughout society. So when you look at gender and race, these are things that impact you in every part of society that you go into. Wherever you go, you will be a man or a woman, not even what your real identity is, but I just mean people will treat you that way. This is ascribed identity, as they put it, not real identity. This is the identity people project onto you. And it's pervasive. These identity prejudices affect your credibility across all spheres of all parts of life, whereas her other examples don't. So this is why she says that, first of all, her main point, testimonial injustice is a thing. It's an important thing to be aware of. And the primary instances of testimonial injustice are credibility deficits that come from large-scale identity prejudices. That's her thesis right there. Okay, so for next time we have a reading from Maureen Linker, and then there's a reflection exercise on the reading. It's just to gauge how you responded to it. It's not a right or wrong answer thing. I do want it done before the video or the class session. Then we have the video and class session, and then we're going to return to our rules for conversation and see if there's any way that we want to update them.